Darwin wrote The Origin of the Species in 1859. He was greatly influenced by Lyell. He said this, "I never forget that almost everything which I have done in science I owe to the study of his great works." Lyell was the one that influenced Darwin so directly. And of course, uniformity then gave him the long ages he needed to propose his theory of evolution. The decline of Darwin's faith began when he first started to doubt the truth of Genesis. He said this, can you read that up there? "I had gradually come by this time, 1836 to 1839, to see that the Old Testament was no more to be trusted than the sacred books of the Hindus or the beliefs of any barbarian." Direct relationship to his rejection of Genesis, rejection of the Genesis account, to his rejection of the Scriptures. He said later on, "The more we know of the fixed laws of nature, the more incredible do miracles become." Of course, that's an irrational thought. Why is that irrational? Any thoughts? I'll get you involved in a second. Yes? Yeah.
Funny thing is, he's saying that it sounds like he's saying that all this, it's incredible that everything came out of nothing, but it's impossible that something created it.
Right. You're very close to it. That's about what he's saying. He's saying the idea of a miracle doesn't make any sense at all because of the fixed laws of nature. Well, where in the heck do the fixed laws of nature happen? I mean, which is more difficult, do you think? To create the reproduction system and to produce whole human beings, or to open eyes that are malfunctioned? I mean, which is it? You can answer. You can shout it out. Which is harder? Of course, the whole human being. To fix an eye is nothing for God. But all of this is about anti-supernaturalism. They reject it directly. They don't want any part of it. So it's irrational for him to say that's not a rational thought. That's illogical. He said, "By such reflection of these, I gradually came to disbelieve in Christianity as a divine revelation." Truth of it's not a slippery slope. It's just jumping off the cliff. I mean, seriously, and I believe this about young earth versus old earth. It's not a slippery slope. It is jumping off a cliff. When you reject the Genesis record as accurate, you're off the cliff. You're just floating for a while. You just haven't hit the bottom. But you will. And we know that it's hit the bottom. We know that the Christianity in Europe is what? Almost non-existent. The once center of Christianity, Christian thought, it's gone. It's irrelevant. It's less than irrelevant. It's obnoxious to them. They want no part of it. Westminster Chapel has a memorial to Charles Darwin. That's like, I don't know if I can say that exactly right, but it's like the Jews having a memorial to Hitler. It's like, what do you mean? It's just insane to say something like that. He destroyed Christianity. Of course, it didn't end with Darwin. Here's a wonderful looking young man. His name is Julius Wellhausen. How many of you have heard of him? A couple of you have. He developed the documentary hypothesis. How many of you know what that is? It's the idea that Moses didn't write the Old Testament. It was written by J.E.P.D. There was different authors, and it was written 600, 700, 800 years later than Moses wrote. And it was based on the idea that, Israel was not monotheistic, it was polytheistic. They were evolutionary, they were stupid, they didn't know how to write at that time. They learned to write a few years later, a few hundred years later. And so Moses couldn't have written it. There was no writing at the time. They were polytheistic. This was way advanced for where Israel was. Of course, the Elba tablets came along and found out that writing had been about 3500 BC, long before Moses wrote, before Moses did what he did at all. So the fact of the matter is that was completely disproven, but it never has been undone. This is another book I want to write, but the whole idea of the Scriptures being under attack directly, this is where it all really began. Lutheran minister who did not believe in the Bible. He was an evolutionist, directly influenced by Charles Darwin. And so he's the one that did it. I mean, he was the final linchpin that literally has led to the destruction. This is 1883. What happened? What did we find out in 1945? As we rolled into Auschwitz, the soldiers came in less than 70 years later, less than 100 years from Darwin's writing. We have, 50 million people died in World War II. Stalin, Hitler. I mean, Hitler wasn't technically an atheist, but he was definitely an evolutionist, without question. These men took that philosophy that so undermined Christianity in less than 100 years, maybe a little closer to 170 years, starting with Hutton himself. And literally 50 million, 100 million people died in the 20th century. All at the hands of this. I know Christianity's done some really stupid things, and they've killed a lot of people and done really bad things. And they kind of set up for atheism to come to Europe by some of the Catholicism and things that were taking place in the medieval church and all of these things. But we never did anything compared to this century. All at the hands of this philosophy that was developed directly by James Hutton. He started it, and it came through us in less than 100 years period of time. It's pretty astounding when you think about it. His teachings led to further rejection of the historicity and authenticity of the Bible. 2 Peter 3 through 7. What time is it right now? How much time do we have? I got about 30 minutes? Okay, great. We may not go quite that long, but we'll see how it goes here. In 2 Peter 3 through 7, the Apostle Peter said, prophesied. Now this is a prophecy. How many of you ever thought of this as a prophecy? This is a prophecy. 1,700 years before it happened. It is one of the most incredible prophecies in the world. It is so accurate as to be astounding that he would say it. And I use that. When I talk to people, I'll just, and by the way, when you talk to people, be nice. Can I just tell you that? We don't need to yell at people. If you didn't get my book for any other reason, get it and read it. And just understand it. Read it twice. My nephew read it in 3 days. Okay? And that's pretty easy to read for that book on evolution, right? But he's got to read it again. He knows that. But he read it. He sat down and read through it. He understood it. You could read it and study it. You can use it in Bible studies, all kinds of places. It's really useful. But I want you to understand it